David had always considered himself a rational man, one who didn't believe in the supernatural. Yet, from the moment he moved into the secluded house on the outskirts of Millbrook, reality seemed to crack. It was a month ago when he first saw her. Stepping out onto the porch one night for a breath of fresh air, he spotted a tall figure in a dark cloak at the edge of the woods, starting just 100 yards from his home. The face was invisible, but David could physically feel the intense stare from beneath the hood. The figure remained motionless. David shivered at the unsettling feeling but convinced himself it was just the whims of a tired mind. Then she began to appear every night. Always at the edge, always in the cloak, always staring intently at David's house. If he tried to approach, the figure dissolved into the darkness. David's sleep became plagued with nightmares where the dark figure entered his home and leaned over his bed. But the worst happened last night. Tormented by insomnia, David went downstairs to the kitchen and froze in horror. There, just a few feet from the house, stood the familiar figure in the cloak. The hood was thrown back, revealing a pale face. David couldn't tear his eyes away from the empty black eye sockets from which black sludge oozed. The creature's lips parted in a silent scream. David dashed upstairs, locked himself in his bedroom, and spent the rest of the night trembling under the blanket. Now he understood. This was not a figment of his imagination. The creature was getting closer, and it clearly wanted something from him. He needed to find out what this creature was and what it wanted, before it was too late. The next morning, David, exhausted from another sleepless night, went to Millbrook's town library. He hoped to find any information on the sinister figure terrorizing him. The elderly librarian, Martha, eagerly helped him sift through archives. While David browsed old newspaper clippings, she brought him a cup of strong coffee and asked with concern, "You're new here, aren't you? Rented the old Agatha's house on the outskirts?" David nodded. "I thought so. You look weary. Is the house troubling you?" David felt uneasy under her penetrating gaze. After a moment, he ventured, "Martha, you've lived in Millbrook for a long time. Maybe you know. In the woods near the house, have you ever seen a strange figure in a dark cloak?" Martha paled. Her hands trembled, and she hastily placed the coffee pot on the table. "So, she has found you. I hoped that after Agatha's death, it would stop." "What will stop? Do you know what that creature is?" David asked eagerly. Martha sighed and sat down opposite him. "My grandfather told me this story. Back at the turn of the last century, a woman lived in that house. Rumors were that she was a witch. One night, enraged villagers broke into her home, dragged her out, and burned her alive in front of the house." David shuddered. Martha continued, "Before she died, the witch cursed them. She said she would return and appear to everyone who lived in that house until she claimed their soul. Since then, every few years, someone rents the house, and within a few months, the tenants either disappear, go mad, or kill themselves. Agatha was the last. She hanged herself in the living room." David felt a chill. Was he destined for the same fate? "Is there no way out?" he whispered. Martha shook her head. "No one has ever escaped the curse, but—" She hesitated. "There's one man who might be able to help. Father Marcus. It's said he studied occultism for years before taking his vows. If anyone knows how to get rid of the witch, it's him." David clung to this sliver of hope. He had to speak with Marcus, otherwise he might be the next victim. St. Patrick's Church stood at the heart of Millbrook, its Gothic spires reaching into the leaden skies. David hesitated at the oak doors, but then, shaking his head, entered. The church was dim, barely lit by candlelight. David made his way to the confessionals where, according to Martha, he could find Father Marcus. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." David recited the traditional phrase as he entered the confessional and knelt. "I'm listening, my son," came the low voice from the other side of the grill. David, disjointedly and confusedly but utterly sincerely, poured out his story to the priest, about moving in, about the terrifying figure at the edge of the woods, about his nightmares, about the visit to the library and Martha's ominous tale. Father Marcus was silent for a long time. Then he sighed heavily. So, the ancient evil has awakened once again. I'm afraid, my son, you've gotten yourself into something far more terrifying and dangerous than you can imagine. But what can I do, Father? How can I rid myself of the curse? There's one way. A witch, even one as powerful as she, can still be defeated. But it will require the greatest strength of spirit and faith. You must be ready to look into the abyss and not flinch. David trembled. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. I'm ready, Father. Tell me what to do. I can't live in fear any longer. I must put an end to this. Very well. Listen carefully. David sat at the kitchen table, twirling the worn leather pouch given to him by Father Marcus. Inside, according to the priest, was an ancient talisman capable of protecting him from dark forces. David was to wear it around his neck and never take it off under any circumstances. But the main task lay ahead. Tonight, at midnight, David was to go to the edge of the woods and face the witch. He had to be prepared to withstand her onslaught, not give in to fear. Father Marcus warned this would be the most challenging trial of David's life. Sensing a threat, the witch would unleash her full power, conjuring the most horrifying visions. But if David could stand against her, summoning the light of his soul, the witch would vanish forever. David clenched the pouch so tightly his knuckles turned white. Fear slithered through him like an icy snake, but he had no choice. He had to end this nightmare. The clock showed 11:45. David stood up, approached the door, and after a moment's hesitation flung it open. The night air rushed into the house, carrying the scents of decayed leaves and rotting wood. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. David stepped into the darkness. The forest greeted him with an ominous silence. Not a rustle, not a creak of branches. Even the night insects were silent, as if anticipating something terrible. David crossed the lawn in front of the house and stopped at the forest's edge. His heart pounded so hard it seemed about to burst from his chest. He gripped the talisman until it hurt and took a step forward. At that instant, the forest came alive. A guttural roar was followed by a blood-chilling laugh. The tree branches stirred, weaving into monstrous figures. Out of the darkness, a familiar silhouette formed. The figure in the cloak stood a few meters from David. The hood was thrown back, revealing a horrific face with empty eye sockets and worms wriggling in place of a mouth. "You've come," hissed a voice, making the hairs on the back of David's neck stand on end. "Fool, your soul will be mine, as were the souls of all who came before you." David clenched his teeth, fighting the urge to turn and run. Every fiber of his being screamed about the danger, begged him to get as far away as possible, but he stood his ground. "No," he said, his voice quavering. "I won't give you my soul, witch. I came to put an end to your evil." The witch laughed. The air around her trembled, thickened, and out of the void, terrible creatures appeared. Giant black dogs with glowing red eyes, winged demons, malicious dwarfs with twisted faces. They surrounded David in a tight circle, snarling and growling. "Let's see if you have the strength for this," hissed the witch, and her monstrous retinue charged at David. The horrific creatures descended on David like an avalanche. Clawed paws reached for him, fanged maws snapped inches from his face. Had it not been for the protective talisman, they would have torn him to shreds in seconds. But the amulet worked. David stood immovable, as if surrounded by an invisible shield, against which the monsters slid off. Powerless cries of rage and malice filled the air. "Not bad," whispered the witch, "but you can't defeat me with that. How about this?" She raised her hands and the world around David warped. The forest disappeared, replaced by a blood-drenched room. In the center, in a pool of spreading blood, lay two bodies, a woman and a child. David recoiled in horror, recognizing the dead woman as his mother. This was the scene that had haunted him all his life. The brutal murder of his mother and sister, which happened before his eyes when he was 10. David fell to his knees, his body racked with sobs. The pain and guilt he had tried to bury for so long crashed down on him with renewed force. Out of the corner of his eye, He noticed movement. The dead mother slowly rose from the floor, her glassy eyes fixed on David. "It's your fault," she hissed with broken lips. "You didn't save us. You should have died with us." "Mom, I'm sorry," David sobbed. "I couldn't. I was too scared." "You must pay." The dead mother relentlessly approached. "You must join us." "No." David jumped up, squeezing his eyes shut and clenching the talisman until it hurt. "This isn't real. It's an illusion. I won't succumb to you, witch." A wail full of impotent rage echoed, and the vision melted away. David once again stood in the clearing, face to face with the enraged witch. "You're more stubborn than the others," she hissed. "But I have something stronger." The world warped again, but this time the clearing remained unchanged. Only opposite David, another figure appeared. His heart skipped a beat. There, a few steps away, stood Sarah, his wife, who had died 6 months ago. "David," she whispered tenderly, "my love, you've finally come." "Sarah," David exhaled. It couldn't be true. But how he wished it were. "You're alive? I've been waiting for you." Sarah stretched her hands towards him. Her face glowed with love and tenderness. "Come with me. Only together can we be happy. Forever." A memory flashed in David's mind. Their last argument with Sarah, the harshest words he had ever spoken. "I wish I'd never met you." And that night, the accident. Sarah, his Sarah, lying on the asphalt, covered in blood. David hadn't had the chance to apologize, to tell her how much he loved her. He took an uncertain step forward, then another. "This is wrong," a quiet voice of reason whispered. "Sarah is dead. It's a trap." But the voice was drowned out by the unattainable desire to make everything right, to be with Sarah. Another step. Sarah's outstretched hands were so close. Just a little more and he could touch her, embrace her, leave with her forever. David lifted his foot for the last step. At that moment, his fingers accidentally clenched on the talisman. The warmth of the amulet burned his skin, piercing through the illusion. And David saw. The clearing was empty. There was no Sarah, only the witch, full of hatred and anticipation. "No!" David recoiled, holding out the talisman. "I don't believe in this lie. Sarah is dead and no maggot can bring her back. I love her and always will, but I must let her go." The witch howled, her face twisted into a ghastly grimace. "You can't win. I will take your soul." But David saw. She was weakening. Her powers were draining. "I won't be broken by your nightmares, beast. I accept my pain and guilt, my losses and mistakes. I carry them within me, but they don't rule me. My spirit is stronger. Be gone and never return." David stepped towards the witch, the talisman in his hands flaring with blinding light. The witch screeched and began to dissolve, like fog under the rays of the sun. In a moment, only the echo of her final wail remained, dissolving into the night. David fell to his knees, exhausted, but for the first time in many years, his soul was filled with peace and tranquility. He had won the greatest victory over his fears and weaknesses. He was free. Far to the east, the sky lightened, heralding the arrival of a new day. David stood up and slowly made his way back to the house. Ahead of him lay a whole life, a life in which he could finally be happy.